Hey everybody, my name is Dom. In this video, I want to dive into a thought process that could be used to make discussions around cards or decks more effective. Within cognitive psychology, there is a field of research dedicated to our formation of categories and concepts. The two terms are closely related and in most contexts can reasonably be used interchangeably. To keep things basic, let's call a category a set of something defined by some kind of commonality. That could be a shared trait, a similar usage case, or a setting to which they all belong. A concept is your mental representation of an idea. It's what comes to mind when you think of a category. Whatever your brain is doing when you are thinking about a category is the concept. Note that I did imply with those statements that concepts are derived from categories. However, that is not necessarily true. There is absolutely debate over whether categories inform our concepts, or if we create the definitions of categories such that they conform to our concepts. But for the purposes of this video, I think focusing on concepts as a sort of mental filter or a cognitive function that allows our brain to more effectively process information is sufficient. Commonly, lecturers of the topic will ask listeners to think of a dog, or a fruit, or a car to illustrate how categories and concepts may differ. I'll use a more audience-relevant example. What comes to mind when I say, think of a dragon card? Maybe you think of Forte, one of the most iconic dragon cards. Maybe this is the card you've lost to the most when playing against Dragon. Or maybe it's your favorite card if you're a Dragon main, the one you're most excited to play. Maybe you think of Oracle. Ramp is one of the most defining mechanics of the class, and it belongs almost exclusively to Dragon. This is one of the two foil cards in the Dragon starter deck. It is likely one of the first cards a Dragon player purchased, and the shiny factor makes it more memorable. That could be a reason it comes to mind quickly. But maybe you think of Fairy Dragon, or any other card that happens to have dragon in its name, or has a picture of a dragon on it. A card like Bahamut. This is a dragon. Maybe this is the first thing that comes to your mind. It could also be that you think of dragon cards as any really big, expensive, flashy card that, despite technically being playable in any deck, basically belongs exclusively to the dragon class as a side effect of ramp. A little less likely, but still possible, maybe you thought of Bellringer Angel, a card that for many sets was included in every single dragon deck. Do you think it's reasonable to call this a dragon card? Maybe you went for the most literal interpretation of the statement, and you thought of a physical copy of the card named Dragon. That is an italics dragon card. Hopefully, with that little process, you can see why categories and concepts can be tricky. How strict of a definition should we have for the category of dragon card? Do we say it's any card that belongs to the dragon class? Or say it's any card that is legal in a dragon deck? Or maybe narrow it down to any card that is very commonly included in dragon decks? How much weight do we provide to mechanical thematics? Should we consider the art or the name at all? Look at this girl. Is this a dragon card? By some of those proposed categorical definitions, yes, she is. There's a dragon symbol in that top left corner. This is legal in dragon decks, but I personally would never call this a dragon card. It does not align with my mental concept of a dragon card. While I am open to strict definitional categorizations of cards, my thought processes are more rooted in mechanics and thematics. I prefer to conceptualize cards by feeling. This does not feel like a dragon card to me. While Kaoru may be a good card in the Passion deck, she's nothing more than a goblin as far as dragon is concerned. You could just run the neutral goblin, right? Well, sorta, but not really. If we think about PDK and other similar cards, it turns out the dragon symbol in the top left is actually relevant. So now we're back to saying Kaoru is a dragon card. You can't win. There is no good answer. I recognize that was a lot of waffling, but I think it demonstrates the point. The concepts we individually develop to interpret cards do not always align with what we may consider valid categorical definitions of cards. Categorizing cards can be messy. Our definitions might feel inappropriate based on our personal concepts or simply leave too much to be desired in terms of accuracy. The way one individual may conceptualize a card type can very easily and very understandably differ from another individual. That is not inherently bad or problematic, but it does make communication more difficult. Carrying this thought towards decks and archetypes. I don't believe we can most effectively discuss deck building or matchup advice if we do not first come to a mutual understanding of an archetype's concept. We don't necessarily need to have the identical concept of an archetype. Rather, simply understanding each other's concepts facilitates better communication. I think one way to go about achieving that understanding is to start by having a strong grasp of your own categorization process. If you can reflect on how you personally think about categories, you can more clearly convey your ideas to another person and in turn have more fruitful discussion. I'll explain some of the ways researchers have studied category formation and then apply that to DIRT. First, we have the classical approach. It is based on the formation of definitions or a checklist of traits, and then evaluating membership with respect to those requirements. There are no partial members, and all members are equally valid. This is generally not considered accurate to the way humans think, but it does logically make sense. Next, we have the exemplar theory and prototype theory. These are sort of two sides of the same coin and aren't mutually exclusive. They are more representative of the way humans actually think. Under both theories, partial membership is valid, and we consider some group members better or worse representatives of that group. Exemplar theory claims that when we evaluate category membership, we remember a variety of other group members and compare how closely something resembles those members. Resembling one exemplar incredibly closely, or sharing traits with a high count of exemplars is likely to be considered enough for group membership. Prototype theory suggests that instead of remembering multiple examples every time we want to draw comparison, the various traits of group members are combined to form an ideal representative to which that comparison is then drawn. If we think about DIRT cards, under the classical approach, we could state that any card is considered a DIRT card if it summons a sediment, is a stack card, or has an Earthright ability. I would consider these to be Control F DIRT cards. This works well enough if we only care about DIRT cards independent of one another or on a mechanical level, but it starts to fall apart when we think about DIRT as a deck rather than just the mechanic. Pascal and Wizardess of Oz are both Control F DIRT cards. They meet the minimum requirement of using the DIRT mechanic. However, both of these cards are completely self-sufficient with respect to that mechanic. Neither one requires the presence of other DIRT cards to function. They build and spend sediment completely on their own. In that way, neither of these necessarily has any ties to DIRT the deck. The classical approach doesn't have enough nuance to account for that, though. I don't think the classical approach is very useful to deck building beyond getting a basic skeleton of an unfamiliar archetype. For example, I think Demon Caller is a DIRT card, but under the classical approach, it could never be considered as such. Between exemplar and prototype theory, I think exemplar theory is the most relevant to card games in general. This is where a card like Demon Caller can more reasonably be considered a member of the DIRT category. Demon Caller is a variant of Remy and Remy. It nearly identically resembles the card, but it doesn't interact with the DIRT mechanic. It also fits in with the general DIRT theme of utilizing board presence to progress a count to 20 strategy. It might not be the best example of a DIRT card, especially because it would fail the classical approach, but exemplar theory still allows it to maintain group membership. We can also rank members as better or worse fits of the category based on how well they fit in with each other. Ignoring power creep, I would rank Pascal as a good example of a DIRT card, as she is strategically aligned with a board-based beatdown plan. She plays nicely alongside other good examples of DIRT cards like Runic Guardian. She makes other DIRT cards better at doing their thing. Oz, on the other hand, I would consider to be a weak example of a DIRT card. You could reasonably evaluate Oz as a generic control tool, or in some cases, a combo piece. In my Set 4 Hybrid Rune video, I said that DIRT could be used to support a control archetype. However, even looking ahead to Set 15, that does not seem to be happening. Without a consistent theme of control in DIRT, a card like Oz arguably has less overlap with exemplars than Demon Caller does, and unsurprisingly, I have played Demon Caller in DIRT far more than Oz. I think this style of thinking is conducive to better deck building as it encourages a more holistic view of an archetype's goals and pushes for use of the broader card pool. The way we name decks is also closely related to our concepts of decks. Choosing good names can help set expectations for what types of cards might be included in a list or what common play patterns to expect. Let's look at Machina Haven and Ward Haven. Robo Falcon is a great card. A turn 5 or 6 Lamonia Evo is a strong play. A Ward Haven deck typically includes Robo Falcon and Iron Knuckle Nun, two core Machina Haven cards, purely on the merits of their own strength and synergy between themselves and within the deck. You could theoretically make space for Lamonia, since regardless of the deck, her Evo is strong, and then maybe add Mechagun Wielder to help facilitate that play. That does not make the deck Machina Haven, though. I think you could maybe add a note to the name Ward Haven with parentheses Lamonia Splash or Lamonia Package to emphasize the inclusion of non-standard cards like Lamonia, but I don't think calling it Machina Haven does anyone any favors. Notable Machina Haven lines, like Turn 5 Father Refinement into Augmentation Bestowal playing Technolord, are missing. The amount of times that you could realistically evolve Lamonia is fewer, and a card like Saintly Core would be very unreliable. Ward Haven to me feels defined by its incredibly high density of wards and the direct synergy it has with the ward keyword. These are notable characteristics of the deck that set it apart from other decks. On a side note, I hate the name Storm Ward Haven. On top of being a mouthful, it feels unnecessary. I can't remember a single meta-relevant deck that was not a control deck that did not include Storm and or Burn in some capacity. Uninteractive damage is foundational to the way this game functions. You don't see people saying Storm Ramp Dragon, or Burn Discard Dragon, Storm Aggro Sword, or Burn Fable Haven. Every deck is going to have Storm or Burn. It is not a notable trait of a deck. Another example of where naming is important is Set 3 Rose Queen versus Silverbolt. The overlap between those lists was pretty large. It was not uncommon for over half of the lists to be shared. The typical forced bounce package at the time was quite large and was beneficial to both strategies. Combo payoffs like Crystalia Tia or Roach were relatively common in both decks. Crystalia Lily was just a good card. Rose Queen even included Bolt pretty often, but it still felt like you could categorize lists into two distinct groups. Aiming to end the game with Silverbolt versus enabling and utilizing Rose Queen made early and mid-game trading patterns different. The ways those decks used the cards available to them felt different. Rose Queen was not just a heavy variant of Bolt. The concepts of the decks were sufficiently distinct to the point that a different name was necessary. One of the bad names I've come across, a name that raised more questions than answers, was during Set 2, Dragon. I commonly saw the name Hybrid Dragon floating around, which I believe described a mix of Ramp and Discard Dragon. Now that just made no sense to me, because Discard Dragon had no reason not to play Oracle. What was the hybrid? What was being mixed? To this day, I still don't know. Thanks for checking out the video. I am by no means an expert in cognitive psychology, and especially not specifically categories and concepts. I may not have most accurately presented the field, either as a result of incomplete memory of my studies or out of a concern for pacing. Regardless, I hope this video gave you something to think about.